and peace to everybody. Shalom and peace to everybody. Let's come together, hands together. This is an amazing old thing, and then you bring down to your heart, and that's tying your heart to your hands. And may the light in me see the light in you, and may the light in you see the light in me. And namaste. And so it is. Well, we're on the verge of Thanksgiving tomorrow, and I hope all you guys are preparing for all the wonderful delicacies and all the things, the traditions that we do. It's always wonderful, but you know the essence of it is really the important thing is that we grab a hold of the reality of the value, the benefit of being thankful. Does being thankful always mean that everything's perfect in your life? And unfortunately, being thankful seldom has anything to do with that as much as being thankful. These things become decisions that we make. We can have much and be unthankful, or we can have little and be unthankful. And so as we go along in this process and find out, and you will find out that light and the light that we are is very prominent and very huge. There's as much as I don't always necessarily like it, I'm finding out that there's all kinds of things that are being taught that I don't know that I agree with anymore. But what's new? That's on 1,000 different levels. But I do think that even Saudi in our reading tonight, it's really cool. Next week is really cool too. So I'm expecting we're going to watch a increase in, well, maybe a little more intense insight than what everything up till this point has been kind of trying to set the stage and to get people prepared. If you haven't ever been around hypnotism or past lives or reincarnation, you know, all of which were things that were certainly bad if you were in Christianity like we were, you know. So we have to then deal with that, and then the reality of incarnation. And there's some stuff in my studies that I've seen, and it's actually kind of surprised me today that Saudi speaks into some of the pieces of how the people lived and functioned there. And so I hope you're blessed, and I hope that you have a wonderful day tomorrow. But tonight we're going to find out some more information about these people from this perspective. Now understand, because I'm recognizing it in my readings, that many of the things that scholars speak as if they know exactly what the thing is, it's quite funny that Saudi living there in many ways has no knowledge of things. So we have to be careful. What's going on, and it's happening in our realm, is that there are lots of suppositions about what something means with no real evidence. So if you understand what a supposition it is, it's something that you suppose is real, but you really have no proof of it. So it is basically, for supposition is a nice word, it is your opinion about something without you having knowledge of the something. And so there's many of those. It's been quite amazing to me to watch him, how many of the things that have been brought out by scholars, how different his perspective is than what I've read and studied from people who are studying the Essenes and Qumran. And so, you know, it doesn't make anybody bad. And to be honest with you, I'm not really convinced that there's even a wrong. I think everybody is trying to figure out, because it is so directly tied to the things in which we have to extract our belief system. The only way to do this any differently is just simply to learn cuneiform and go study what the Sumerians believed, recognize that's the oldest that we have, and continue with that. They were the closest to the archons. They were the closest to the Anunnaki. And for many people who don't even know about those things, much less be convinced that they actually happened, that really doesn't make a lot of sense either. So, tonight is chapter 13, and it's called Questioning. Dolores writes, when I started conducting my research, I was astounded by Katie's amazing accuracy. Saudi's description of Qumran community has been verified by the excavation accounts of the archaeologists. The beliefs and certain rituals of the Essenes have been substantiated by the translations of the scrolls. But there were a few discrepancies, so I made a list of questions and I asked them at our last session together. We had been working on this for so long and had covered so much material, and I thought it was now safe to ask Saudi leading questions about things that I had read. The scholars had given the name People of the Covenant, or the Covenanters, to the Essenes. And Saudi frowned when I asked if the word covenant had any connection with his people. He said the terms were unfamiliar to him and he could not understand why someone would give them a name like that. They were known only as the Essenes. He said a covenant is agreement between two parties to uphold a bargain. So from this perspective, many of the things that are going to be added by later minds may very well have not really been that prominent or of interest in their time. You know, it's kind of like us. We're all trying to live our lives. We're trying to find truth, and we're trying to grow daily. There's really many things in our life we just don't have time for. You know, if you came and you ask somebody 20 years from now about the woke movement, I believe they will have no concept of it. As it's already being proven that it's about to be flushed out like the tidy bowl man in the very near future, this whole concept. And there's many, many things in the cosmic arena that is desirous to get rid of much of this stuff. All of the twisted stuff like the transism and the wokeism and the racism, the isms are, I believe you will find, are on their way out already. Even people of color are getting tired of the lie of racism. There's always going to be some form of racism amongst people that share different life systems. But it doesn't just have to be color. That's just what has been profitable for some factions in the recent future. But it won't last long. And so they've given this name of the Covenanters, and he says, I don't have any idea what you're talking about or why anybody would even give that to us. He says, Dolores says, I asked if the name Zadok, many of you may not have known of Zadok, but Zadok was very prominent in the Jewish time at this time with the temple and many other things. If it meant anything to him, and one of the theories about the origin of the Essenes is that they descended from the Zealots who were led by this man. He corrected my pronunciation, putting the accent on the first syllable, Zadok, instead of Zadok. And so Saudi now responds and he sighs. He is a leader, and many follow him, saying that he teaches the way of life. He is a warmonger, and he wishes to be rid of all oppressors now. So I've never heard those pieces put in concept like that about Zadok, and I have not studied it exhaustively, but I have studied Zadok and being Zadik, which is akin to being righteous. Uh, and so Dolores asked the question, is there any relation between them and your community, the Zealots? You remember Yeshua had a zealot in his congregation. And he says, no, they are not of us. The ones we know of as Zadok are the zealots that live in the hills. They are very wild. They say that most of them are touched by the moon. They also believe in the prophecies, but they believe that they prophesy war. So we already begin in two separate factions. We begin to see different ideologies about the same thing. So they're both studying the prophecies, but they both have totally different interpretations. And you're going to find, friends, I'm finding this out, the Nag Hammadi has a lot to do with where we're headed and why we're headed there. But there were not just one belief or two beliefs. The beliefs were as varied as you can imagine. And so he says they also believe in the prophecies, but they believe that they prophesy war. And in order for the Messiah to come and be able to take his kingdom, that they must win it for him. And there is much bloodshed over this. If they would but look deeper into the prophecy perspective, they would know that he shall not be king for an earthly kingdom. But you cannot tell them this. They would argue forever to eternity. And so I want to pass along a little word of wisdom from Saudi for you. As we continue to study the Nag Hammadi, it's going to be very difficult for many people to get this right inside of their minds. Most of these things that were written, and when we finish the first book that we're reading in the Nag Hammadi, we're going to take the time and we're going to read the other, there's either 4 or 5 other books of Revelation in the Nag Hammadi, all attributed to different people than John. And we're going to read all of those, one after another. And then if we need to, we'll read the book of Revelation, and you will see some things that are quite revealing in themselves. It's time for a new perspective. And so Dolores asked him, then people are wrong who think that there is a connection between your people and them. And Saudi responds, at least their information has come from strange places. Many tongues wrap themselves, listen to it, around tales, and in the telling, they bend them. So the fact that you might say, well, I'm not sure about what the truth is, don't be surprised. Here we have her channeling Saudi, and Saudi's 2,500 years ago saying the same thing. That's why they stayed in their quiet place and they read and studied the scriptures, and he studied them from the masters. And as as we continue, you'll see this comes up quite often, that he's really not all that interested in looking outside of his picture. Because when he looks outside of his picture, what he sees is ugly things, and he would rather not see ugly things, so he doesn't go into that world. He stays in his world. And that can be good and that can be bad. In his situation, it was good. And you'll see why. As it can be for us. But just because we do that doesn't mean it has to be good. That's the point I'm trying to get you to get a hold of. Both are still positive. And so Dolores asks, she says, the Jubilees are mentioned by the translators as a holy day, but it was unfamiliar to Saudi. He did say before that they were not morose people. They celebrated the joy of life. They may have called the holiday by another name. And so right there is kind of one of the little flickering red lights that you need to learn how to see. that many things as we go, especially we're going to get into some of the Old Testament and some of the Torah. The Torah that Saudi lived and knew as the Torah isn't the same Torah that we know of. It's really crazy because he does get into some of the books and his perspectives on those books. And in some cases, it's pretty drastically different. And so she asked him, she says, a scroll called the War of the Sons of Light with the Sons of Darkness was one of the few that were recovered intact, and much importance has been given to its translation. There has also been much controversy as to whether it should be taken literally or symbolically, and you need to hold those thoughts. Are we talking literal here, or are we talking symbolic? Because I'm going to tell you that 99% of what we're reading is symbolic. It doesn't mean what you think it means. And I've shown you that over and over again with the things that Yeshua says, and then we find another source where he's speaking, and one seems to contradict the other. And so there has also been much controversy as to whether it should be taken literally or symbolically. It was supposed to be predicting a terrible war that had not yet occurred and instructions about what to do when it happened. This was very confusing to Saudi. So in the event she is going back to that time, he's confused by this. In other words, this wasn't their teaching. This wasn't what they programmed into their children. Like most of us have been waiting for the mark of the beast, and some people are still hung up on that nonsense. The mark of the beast is all around us, friend. All you need to do is a little bit of shadow work, and you'll find the mark of the beast. Or you'll find that it doesn't exist in you. And so Saudi says, there are many such scrolls that speak of wars, but a war that had not happened? He frowned. Unless it was one that is someone's vision, I have no idea. In our scrolls, it is recording of events that have happened to the nations of the earth. So now stop and think, if you know anything about the Dead Sea Scrolls, about all of the books, all of those books are history, not predictions. So when it is said that John is writing about what is going on in the time he's living in the book of Revelation, friend, that's all old news. So, unless it was one that was someone's vision, I have no idea. In our scrolls, it is the recording of events that have happened to the nations of the earth. We gather the information as much as we're able to. I know it not. Again, it sounds more like something that was a vision of someone than the meaning of an actual happening. If it is experienced with the senses, it is recorded and described at great length. So in other words, if it's something that happened that you can see, hear, touch, taste, that was real, then they write exhaustively of it. And if it doesn't, they don't do that because it's just somebody's vision. And that's not to say that visions don't have significance, because I believe they do. And so Dolores then asked him, who would they mean by the sons of light? And Saudi, I would not know, having not read the scroll. It could be anyone. To have not read it and to make a conclusion of this would be foolish. There's some pieces that we need to grab a hold of his perspective of things. And so a man called the Master of Righteousness, Teacher of Righteousness was more appropriate, has been mentioned in the translations and has been confused with Jesus, and I don't know where she got that, because none of it that I know of was ever confused with Jesus, maybe in some Christian preachers' minds, because their stories bear some resemblance to each other. there are arguments over who this man might have been. And so Saudi says, the name is familiar. And listen at this again. There was at one time an elder of that name. So we have people over here who are scholars who are trying to figure out who the teacher of righteousness was that lived at that time. And that's always the way that the teacher of righteousness has been proposed to me, is that we are looking for someone who living in Jesus' time who was the teacher of righteousness. And here we have Saudi prior to that date who says, oh, well, that's the story of an ancient man. So this is a place where this actually makes you question the scholars' opinions, if you would, their suppositions. And so there are arguments over who this man might have been, past tense. So this man has already lived and is no longer on the earth, the teacher or master, as she put it, of righteousness. This name is familiar. There was at one time an elder of that name, but he is not here with us. He lived long ago. And long ago could be, in perspective, could have been 1,000 years ago. Was he an important man, she asked? He says, from the stories, yes, and he will be again from the tales that are told. It is said that he will return. I know not when he shall be born again unto this earth. And so we had a perspective of what a statement like that might mean. But when you begin to put in the reality of reincarnation, he's not saying that this might be some supernatural God-man that comes back to earth. It's more likely that what he's speaking in context, using the exact same words in context, that this person will once again reincarnate. Having lived in the past, he will come back. But with reincarnations, they can sometimes happen quick, as you've heard him speak, or there can be many years, 200-300 years, and then a person reincarnates. They've been doing something else in the cosmos, and they choose to come and reincarnate for the cleaning up of their karma. They needed to learn things in the cosmos. You guys will learn in the Nag Hammadis that we have been lied to massively. One of the teachings of Jesus, and I'm going to jump ahead because I'm really stoked about what I'm finding. One of the teachings of Jesus out of Jesus' mouth in the Nag Hammadi is that original creation, that there were 12 universes created, not one. That's his teachings. That there were 12 universes. So when you hear these modern age people who are speaking about other universes, actually they're lining up with the teachings of these writings of the Gnostics and Yeshua. That there were and are. Why then does somebody not come back for 300 years? Because they maybe have traveled to another universe, which was the whole concept of the multiple universes. So, from the stories, yes, he will again, from the tales that are told, it is said he shall return. I don't know when. He shall be born again unto this earth. You notice no connotations of he's the God-man, because this is the kind of stuff where Christians try to turn that into Jesus. Or Elijah, or Enoch, or... And so Dolores asked, why was he such a special person that he was included in the writings? And Saudi responds, it is very difficult to describe. He was as one step beyond others around him, and had the ability to see the heart of matters and to know what was right. This is part of why he was known as the Master. Now, I will tell you, I don't have any problems believing that Yeshua coming that he could have in fact been in another incarnation. We don't know how long this was, but it was a long time ago. But it's very possible that he came again to do what he was here every time he came, which was to bring truth to the earth, to bring enlightenment to the earth spiritually. And so he says, it is very difficult to describe. He was one step beyond others around him and had the ability to see the heart of matters and to know what was right. This is part of why he was known as the Master. And so Dolores asks, some people think he might be confused with the Messiah. And this you should really grab a hold of this. Sadi responds, no, the Messiah is our prince. And the Master was just a master. He was not a prince. So it is very clear to be said that Solomon could have very easily been Mashiach, having been the prince of King David. Part of the story deals with the master of righteousness and the wicked priest. If you've read this in the Dead Sea Scrolls, then you know that that's correct. No one has ever been able to satisfactorily identify either of these individuals. Saudi, wicked priest, question. This is unfamiliar to me. This is not one that I have read. I'm not saying that it does not exist. I haven't read them all. And so Dolores asks again, the master of righteousness was supposed to have been crucified. This is one of the reasons for the confusion between him and Jesus. I asked if he knew whether the master of righteousness died in any special way. Saudi responds, I do not know the whole story. I've read very little on this matter. It could take more than a lifetime to read all of the scrolls. And Dolores asked, did he have anything to do with the beginnings of your community? And Saudi responds, I do not know. From the tales that we have had handed down, this does not sound to me correct. And of course, all of the writings about the teacher of righteousness that they found in the Essenes. And another scroll that has been translated is called the Thanksgiving Psalms. Saudi, frowning, says, perhaps I do not know them by these terms. Explain. I am at a loss to understand. A psalm is like a message to God in which you speak directly to God with your heart. It is very possible that some were written down. And so you see from that concept that it's very probable that at the beginning of AD, the ending of BC, there were no book of Psalms that David wrote. Those were all recordings probably found in history of David's life and were kind of similar to prayers that David spoke between himself and God, and someone heard them, his scribe maybe, and wrote them down, and eventually they were compiled into what we now know as the Psalms. So Dolores then asked, there was a man called Hillel who was supposed to be a wise teacher of the time. He had a following of people who called themselves Hillelites, and it has been suggested that Jesus may have studied with him. Saudi recognized the name, corrected my pronunciation with more of a roll on the L's. Who is reported to be a wise man, yes. If we speak of the same one, the Hillelites, they were his followers. And so Dolores says, what do you know of that man? Saudi says, I don't know a great deal other than that he lived and he was a man of peace. Though I believe that some of his followers have since turned around to ways of war, I'm not familiar with a lot of the people from the outside. He spoke a lot of words of truth. But his followers, they reasoned with their minds and not their hearts, and they changed the teachings to what they wished to hear. Dolores asks, is he still alive? He says, I do not think so. I think he no longer lives on this earth. And so she moves to the Maccabees. We went through the book of Maccabees. The Maccabees were people who were important in Jewish history, and he again corrected my pronunciation. And Saudi says, I do not know about them. I have just heard of them. They are a very powerful family, and many people listen to what they have to say. The money has many friends. And Dolores says, oh, I thought maybe they were wise people. And Saudi responds, some are. There are some wise men in each group, but then there again are fools. And so Dolores says, are they from the area? He says, I'm not truly sure. I believe that they have a stronghold in Jerusalem pronounced Jerusalem. I'm not again too sure, but I believe that that is what I've heard it. And so the translators mention the book of Enoch often in their reports on the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is not in the version of the Bible that we have at this time, but the scholars consider it important. It has created controversy amongst them, and I ask if he was aware of this book. Saudi responds, yes, I have heard of this. It is taught. Dolores, is it looked upon favorably? And Saudi responds, well, it depends on who you speak to. It creates high feelings. As some may say, you either follow it wholeheartedly or you think that this is crazy. So it also created controversy in his day. I do not think much of it. There are those who believe it is everything of truth, and there are those of us who believe it is lunacy. But that is my opinion, and others disagree. It is their right. And one thing in going through this that I see, it really is at many levels, it is a lot different than what we are taught. We are taught to go in the highways and byways and compel them to come in. To compel means to move somebody to action, you might say. And that concept doesn't seem to be, and neither does it seem. And the more I read about the ancient Jesus outside of Christianity, the less he was interested in how many people came to salvation. What he was interested in is coming and speaking his message. And just as I told you, our Father said to me a few weeks ago, those who are meant to hear you will hear you, and the rest will be deaf. It's almost as if it's supernatural that he's not going to let the people who are real hear my message. Because if you hear my message, it will change your life. I suspect that the Father has always been that way. It's like it's a privilege. So he says, it was looked upon favorably for the most part by the Essenes community, and some thought it was an important book. Saudi thought it was very possible somebody's imagination. So it doesn't mean that Saudi is right. It just simply is a virtue that he has been there, he's been studying, he's been reading, and he goes, you know, that's just a little bit more than I can deal with. We're all going to encounter those places. One of the things that I believe that we have to learn is we have to learn how to detach, to unattach ourselves, just as we've been learning in the Vedic and in the Kabbalion, that we must learn how. Oftentimes we are so attached to a belief system that we kill the ability to learn because we are closed-minded. What they taught me in church is the truth, and there is no other truth. And they tell you that there is no other truth. And if you go outside of the Christian church and the Bible, then everything that you hear is a lie. That's the programming. That's how they manipulate you into never learning who you truly are. And so We should be able to listen to anybody's point of view and even disagree with it and be okay with that. May God give you revelation as we go along. And it's okay when you have a knowing, you have a knowing from source, or you have an intuition. You should believe that even if everybody around you doesn't. In time, if it is from source, will source not then be kind and benevolent to you and give you understanding that you don't possess? Of course he will. It's his desire to give us understanding. But here's the problem we have. Sometimes that understanding takes 30 years of studying before you get it. That's why many of the things that I spoke 30 years ago in Austin are now coming out that they were from the Spirit. I was right, and I had no knowledge of how I was right. But in time, he will give me the understanding that what he gave into me was the truth. What came through me was a channel from the Spirit, if you would. And so Dolores says, where did that book come from? Was that added later? And Saudi responds, the book of Enoch is something that has been passed down from the Kalu. What do you mean added later to what? I'm not understanding. So see, she comes in with a perspective of the Bible is the thing. I hear it still. I hear really notable scholars on TV talk about the Bible is the thing. The Bible is not the thing. It's the first mistake you make. The Bible is the thing for Christianity. Truth is the thing for everyone outside of Christianity. And sometimes the Bible ain't true. And so she says, I made a mistake, a slip of the tongue. It was hard for me to remember that they didn't know anything about our Bible. So I referred to the Torah because that seemed to be the main book. And of course, see there again, she's still thinking in Bible terms because that's all the knowledge that she has, that this is some book. It's not a book. It was hundreds of books, many of which have been lost and hidden and burnt and deceived away from us. And so she says, I referred to the Torah because that seemed to be the main book that he was familiar with, although I had no idea what it was composed of. And so then she's honest and tells you the truth. He said the book of Enoch was not in the Torah. So many people have said that it was the Catholic Church that took it out. Now we have Saudi, who predates the Catholic Church, who says the book of Enoch was never part of the Torah. Or at least up until his time, BC. And so I read the secrets of Enoch, which was found in the apocryphal lost books of the Bible. Whether this is the version Saudi referred to or not, this one was confusing enough to read. It deals a lot with astronomy and symbolism and apparently contains hidden meanings. There may be other books that refer to Enoch, and indeed there is. I knew the names of different groups of people that are mentioned in the Bible. I thought I would throw them out and see what Saudi said about them. And so Dolores asked, have you ever heard of the Pharisees? He frowned. The Sadducees? I again had trouble with the pronunciation. And Saudi responds, the Pharisees, they are the well-to-do. They are the so-called lawgivers. They are both members of the assembly, and they sit there and argue all day so nothing gets done. The Sadducees have to do with the running of the temples, plural, and laws that will be passed. And they also argue with Herodes far as what they wish to be done. They are always, one is getting at the other. They say that the one the Pharisees have because they have great wealth, and they show this, that they are not as pious as these others. They say, walk around in ashes and sackcloth. And so she asked him, have you ever heard of the Samaritans? And Saudi responds, from Samaria, yes. The word Samaria was said so fast, it was hard to understand. The Samaritans were people of the children of Jacob, and for some reason I cannot remember, there was a blood feud, and they are considered less than their brothers, who we know as the Jews. They were as one at one point, but now they are looked down upon because they are perhaps not as good in the eyes of the others. And the question had been progressing smoothly, and I did not know I'd stepped on forbidden ground until I asked about Qumran. All I wanted to know was the meaning of the name. I was not prepared for his reaction. He had excitedly spoke several words in a different language. And Saudi, what does it mean? I shall not speak of this. If you do not know the meaning, you have no need to know. So look at that concept that I've shown you about where other places where it's, if you don't know, then you're not supposed to know. So we have a picture that everything should be ours because we have an entitlement. But that wasn't the way that they lived before us. There were many things that were not shared, and if you were not enlightened, you weren't going to get enlightened. If you needed to get enlightened, you needed to go talk with God and allow him to enlighten you, which is why this says that God is the one who does the enlightening. And he says, so Dolores says, I've heard it means light. And Saudi responds, there are many essences to the term meaning light. And if you do not know which pathway it belongs upon, there is no need for you to question. If it were important to you, you would have knowledge. What does he mean by that? If it were important to you, you would go find out. And if you don't go find out, then it's not important to you. And so she writes, this can be frustrating, but it made it very plain that he did not want to answer. Later, my research revealed that when the Romans conquered the Essenes allowed themselves to be tortured to death rather than to reveal the answer to the questions of this nature. What seemed a simple topic to me apparently took on larger proportions to him. Of course, I did not know this at the time, and I was unaware which questions were the touchy ones. And so Dolores asked, is there any significance about the fact that Qumran has been built near the salt cliffs? And Saudi responds, not so much the salt cliff as the area. It is a point of sounded like kin energy. This was not clear. It is an opening. It is one of the energy points. That sounds very much like portals that we're hearing them talk about here now. Why would they then be there and have enlightened wisdom and knowledge? Maybe there's more to this energy thing. I think it's quite strange that this was written before energy got popular. And if this is truly, if she is talking to someone who lived in that time, they've told us about batteries that were ancient. You can find history of those batteries in ancient Egypt before the pyramids were built. And Saudi said, we use them, we have them, but they're very old. When he says very old, we have to take a little more responsibility that his very old could very easily mean from our time 5,000 or 6,000 years old. That's a long time, friends. And so she asked if there's a significance to it being by the salt cliffs, which kind of makes sense at some levels because salt is such an important value. In fact, at some levels, it was worth more than gold was. But he says it's not about that. It's about the kin, the energy. People have said it is an odd place to build a community. It is so isolated. Saudi responds, that is one of the benefits. And Dolores says, they thought there would be no way anyone could live there. Saudi responds sarcastically, and a man cannot live in the Sahara, but they do. And so Dolores asks, people have said it is so isolated you cannot use the water of the Dead Sea. Saudi responds, and as I can just kind of hear somebody, once again, this is probably at a level of sarcasm, and he goes, there is water there that is drinkable and usable, and we have what we need. So no matter what it looks like to you, that this place is very foreign and it's nothing but a bunch of dry rocks and stuff, that's not really the picture. That's just your picture. And so she asks then, what is the meaning of the word Essenes? And Saudi responds, Holy One. And I wondered why he had no hesitation in telling me the meaning of that word while he objected to telling me the meaning of Qumran. This shows the inconsistency of the thing he objected to. I don't really think it does. I think what maybe Dolores isn't seeing, and there's many of these things that I've seen, and I don't always commentary on them, but I think what we don't understand is, and you can find some information very akin to the mindset that Saudi has, it appears to me anyways. This is a perception I have. If you watch the Skinwalker Ranch, that is a place of energy. If you watch the Blind Frog Ranch, that is a place of energy. There are many of these places of energy. What we don't understand, dear friend, if I were to tell you the truth that you don't know, humanity has existed for way over 100,000 years. And you have no concept. Most people cannot deal with the Sumerians, who are a new civilization. That's why at the time that we live in, they're continuing to find in all of these places, they are finding these ancient things, and when they carbon date them out, they find out that this is 25,000 years old. Well, we were brought up under the mind-wrecking mindset that humanity's only been alive 5,000 years, and when we get to 7,000 years, we're going to be in the Sabbath of humanity. The Jews did a good job of deceiving you because they know the truth, whether you do or not. And so I think she views it as inconsistency, but I'm not quite sure that it's really so inconsistent. He has knowledge he's not interested in talking about because she doesn't need to know about the supernatural things. If you go talk to the American Indians, if you go talk to the Hopi about the prophecy of the man in the red cap, there's going to be parts of that they will not talk with you. You don't have any knowledge. You're asking, they would actually respond exactly like Saudi has to Dolores. That is our ancient history. That is, we have the stories. If you cared enough, you would go find out about them, and then you would ask me the right questions, but the questions you're asking are not the right questions, and I won't answer them. I've heard some American Indians recently make that same statement. And so Harriet, if you remember, was her friend, again referring to her list of questions. She asked this: does the name Midrashim or Mishnah mean anything to you? The question obviously upset him, for he spoke several words excitedly in a different language, and there were many times like this that created enough of an emotional outburst for him to slip into his native tongue. And he says, why do you ask? And Dolores says, we just wondered if you had anything in any of your writings about the Midrashim. Saudi responds, this again caused him to become upset. I will not speak of this. And so Dolores says, there's no way we will know the answers unless we ask questions. Saudi responds, why do you have questions that show only partial knowledge? We have heard of these things and are asking if you can either verify them or help us further in our knowledge. Sometimes we have only bits and pieces of information. Saudi interrupted. It can be dangerous to have just partial information. And this was a surprise. You think it's not good for us to know these things? Saudi responds, it is of concern, yes. In speaking of things that you know only partial of and invoking words of power that you may know only these scatterings of, you may be dealing with more than you will be able to handle. And you're going to see as we go along here, exactly like the thing about them being in a place of power, friend, these people were people who were living the light spiritual life. And there is great power. When Yeshua says, if you become like me, you will have power, he really meant that. When Paul said that you should have power, he really meant that. What the problem is they put those scriptures in there and then they do everything they can do to hide the power from us. They don't want us to have the power. The power exists in every one of us to fulfill exactly what Yeshua said. And you're going to see him say this multiple times in multiple different writings. The same thing is attributed to Yeshua as saying the power is in you. But we can't heal the sick or raise the dead. We should ask ourselves the question, why can I not raise the sick and raise the dead? And so he's concerned because just as this brought on the beginning of enlightenment in this place, I told you that when I came to the realization that this prayer in the Bible is nothing but an occultic incantation, I wasn't wrong. If you chant this, and if you speak this, and if you recite this over yourself, you will watch a consistent change in spirit power. Once again, we've been told all of these things are bad. Why did they tell us that they were bad? They told us that they were bad because they knew that if we knew the truth, we would use them and we would conquer them, not them conquer us. Which is why Christianity is dying, because of the web. Because people, in spite of Christianity, are starting to learn the truth that has been hidden from them their whole life. And so she says, this took us off guard because we certainly didn't realize there was any danger involved in asking simple questions. We said we would abide by his judgment, and we asked what he suggested we do. Saudi responds, speak no more of it until you have knowledge that may be gained. Because to speak of it to those who might trick you in some way into revealing what you have to better their cause, this could be very dangerous. And Dolores says, how are we to get the other knowledge unless we ask questions? Is it allowed for us to seek? And Saudi responds, seeking is allowed, but be very careful. And Dolores says, it's not always easy to find the right people who can give us this information. And Saudi responds, it is true, but you must always protect yourself from those and from saying too much to those who begin asking you questions in return. Then Dolores says, then you think it is better not to seek this knowledge. And Saudi responds, I said that not. This is your meaning of that which I spoke. I state only to be careful and to guard who you would share your knowledge with and receive little or nothing in return. Dolores says, well, the knowledge is enough. Saudi says, no. For knowledge can be very harmful because you would be tempted to use it. So that then gives us, once again, another connotation of a hidden power frame structure that we know nothing about. And not having full knowledge could cause danger to yourself as well as to others. How many times, if you've ever paid any attention, how many times have you gone on YouTube and watched somebody who did something as simple as take a Ouija board, and all of a sudden, what happened? They released a dark spirit into this realm. How did that dark spirit come? It entered through a portal that they opened. Oftentimes they won't close them, and many dark spirits will come in. And their life becomes horrible, and it's nightmare, and it's destructive, and anyone who comes has the possibility of another dark spirit attaching to them, and then they leave the house and take it, and now their house is having problems. And so Dolores says, I thank him for warning us. This outburst was most unexpected and certainly out of character for the placid Saudi. He had refused to answer questions before, but never came on so strongly. I still wonder what it was that we asked that triggered such an emotional reaction. And I returned to my question a little more cautiously this time. Have you ever heard of a book called the Cabal or the Kabbalah? And Saudi responds, some of us have read it. There are scrolls that contain some of the writings, yes. And since he said some of us have read it, that would tell you he had a knowledge of Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism. And so Dolores asks, is it a complicated book? And Saudi responds, everything is complicated if you would make it so. It explains many of the laws of nature and balance and how to use these for your own good. Witchcraft is what it would be called in Christianity. How to open oneself up to what worlds surround us in this world and others. Did anybody see it? In this world around us and many others. So the knowledge I shared with you is not new to him. And it's also ancient. And so then Dolores says, he did not know who had written the Kabbalah, but it was older than many of the other books that they had. So this thing that you hear about the Cabal and about Kabbalah, friends, that's thousands of years old. And it is exactly what I just said to you. It is ancient, Jewish, mystical, occult, if you want to use that term. I don't really like it because these are realms in which Yeshua constantly functioned in and encouraged us to grow up in knowledge and learn to function in. In fact, he actually requires it. So if there's some truth to this, then many people who don't care enough to gain knowledge and don't ever acquire it, it won't be a positive thing for you. It will be a detriment against you. And so later, when I had a chance to do further research, I may have discovered the reason Harriet's question upset him so. I found that Hebrew theology is divided into three parts. The first was the law, which was taught to all the children of Israel. The second was the Mishnah, or the soul of the law, which was revealed to the rabbis and the teachers. And the third part was the Kabbalah, which was the soul of the law, which contained secret principles and was revealed only to the highest initiates amongst the Jews. The Midrashim referred to methods used to simplify or more fully explain the laws. Apparently, we had unknowingly crossed over into a secret area of teaching which Saudi and the other Essenes were involved in. Maybe this explains his emotional outburst and his warning about using words of power and speaking of things which we had no knowledge of. And so the translators of the Dead Sea Scrolls speak of the Damascus document and think there was probably other Essene communities, possibly one in the Damascus area. But I trespassed on forbidden ground when I asked about it, and he answered in the now familiar, I speak not of this. It was strange how it bothered him to answer certain questions, yet she would answer similar ones with no difficulty. So Dolores says, do you know anything about an Essene group in Alexandria? And Saudi, long pause. My father says that they have recently spoken of some teachers who have gone, not to Alexandria, but to Egypt. But I do not know. Did he ask his father? There are many others. There are one that I know of in Egypt. There are several in the area surrounding Israel and Judea. Name of another country unclear, but it sounded like Tode phonetically. There are many. We at Qumran are perhaps one of the larger, but not the only. And just so you know, the people he's talking about in Egypt are the same people who possessed the Nag Hammadi text. This is Gnosticism. This is the ancient study and using of divine supernatural knowledge of the spirit realm. I said to somebody the other day, and I'll say it, it's worth saying again. In Christianity, we were taught that there was a spirituality. We were never taught how to use spirituality. So they gave you a sniff of it, but the sniff is absolutely useless because you have no knowledge about what they're even talking about. When Jesus says that these things and greater will I do, I haven't met anybody who has any clue or even any aspirations of trying to accomplish that. Maybe they had a thought about it, but having a thought about something as intense as looking inside oneself and learning of one's higher self is a totally different thing. So, strange how he only objected to speaking of the one at Damascus. He said that to his knowledge, the other communities were also isolated, but they all had the same principles as Qumran, the accumulation and preservation of knowledge. They were far from being a single, isolated, small group of people. If we were to preserve knowledge and we just stayed amongst ourselves, this very small group, how and that would knowledge be preserved? If it was safeguarded by us and not shared, therefore there should be others also. And so Dolores asked, some people have the idea that is what it is, a very isolated group that doesn't associate or pass the knowledge on. And Saudi responds kindly, well, some are fools. It just wasn't passed on in the way that we view the world. We think that that they have church every sun worship day so that you can go and learn knowledge which you never learn. That's why Charlie Starr in Blackberry Smoke has a line that says, you wash your hands, but they never come clean. They never come clean because you're washing the wrong thing. Your hands are not the problem. Your mind is the problem. And until you change your mind, it don't matter how many times you wash your hands. Scientists and Arabs scoured the caves in Qumran area looking for more scrolls or fragments. In one cave amongst the rubble of a caved-in wall, they came across a rare find, 2 copper scrolls. Scrolls have always been written on either papyri or leather. This was very unusual. Originally, they had been one continuous strip about 8 feet long by a foot wide and had been cut apart for some unknown reason. The archaeologists could see symbols stamped into the metal, which was also unusual. But weather and time had taken its toll. The copper had become so oxidized that the scrolls became dangerously brittle to handle. They were so fragile it was impossible to unroll them. For 4 years, they worked on the problem on how to open them safely, and finally, Professor H. Wright Baker of the University of Manchester, England, devised an ingenious method to cut the scrolls into strips. It worked so well that not even a single letter was lost. After all the trouble, was it worth it? After translating, the scrolls were found to contain a treasure hunter's dream. There were lists of buried treasures worth fabulous amounts. The inventory included gold, silver, and other treasures, possibly weighing more than a total of 100 tons. Their estimated worth was $12 million in the 1950s when the scrolls were translated. They would be worth much more now. The scrolls gave exact directions for 60 different burial or hiding places in and around Jerusalem and in the Judean desert. The description of the scrolls in their translation is given in the treasure of the copper scroll. He gives a detailed account. He was positive it was the inventory of an actual treasure and that the objects were buried in the places indicated. His only doubt was in the incredible amounts. He thought there must have been a mistake in translation. The amounts were too breathtaking. For instance, a total of more than 3,179 talents, a weight of measure of silver, and 385 of gold, 165 gold bars, 14 silver pitchers, and 619 vessels of precious metals. The directions were explicit. In the cistern, which is below the rampart in the eastern side, in a place hollowed out of rock, 600 bars of silver. All of the directions were this exact. Mr. Allegro says most of the places indicated would probably have been difficult or impossible to find after the Roman war devastated the area. None of this treasure has ever been found. The last entry on the copper scroll gave directions to the location of another copy of the same inventory concealed in a pit adjoining on the north, the great drain of the basin near the temple. This duplicate copy was never found. Some of the archaeologists have come to the conclusion that the copper scrolls are a hoax, that the treasure never existed. They said it had to be a hoax because where could the Essenes have gotten such fabulous amounts of wealth if they had been sworn to poverty? The scroll must have been more difficult to inscribe than the normal papyri. It would have been an awful lot of trouble to go to in order to perpetrate a trick. Others say the scroll may not be speaking of an actual treasure, but is using symbolism to convey another message that has not been figured out. I believe it is possible for the Essenes to have either accumulated that much wealth over the years of their existence, or that they were made guardians of wealth from another source, mostly Jeremiah, when he took his trip out into the desert with all of the gold and the precious things that came out of the temple before the temple was sacked. The Bedouin of the area had been a tremendous help to the scientists because they knew every nook and cranny of the desert. It is possible that over 2,000 years they may have found some of the treasure. Also, because the duplicate scroll was never found, it is possible that someone found it years ago and followed the directions. I believe our modern generation was not the first people to find what the Essenes had hidden. During this last session, when I asked questions from my research, I decided to see if he might be able to shed any light on this puzzle. But how to do it without asking leading questions? Saudi was in the library on the upper level studying some scrolls, so it was a perfect environment. When I asked if he was studying any particular scrolls, he answered with the now familiar, "I shall not speak of this." He would only say that it was not the familiar, "I shall not speak of this." He would only say it was not the Torah. When he went on the defensive about certain subjects, it was no use trying to get the answers unless I could do it by roundabout methods. So Dolores asks, do they ever make the scrolls out of any other materials besides skins and the papyri? He responds, there are other methods of making them. I am not a copier. I am not familiar with them, but there are other ways, yes. Have you ever seen any scrolls that are made out of metal? Saudi responds, yes. This apparently was another forbidden topic of discussion, and he became suspicious again. Why do you ask? Dolores says, I thought this would be an odd material to make them out of. It would be a lot more work. Wouldn't it be harder than using the stylus and papyri? Saudi responds coldly, yes. He asks suspiciously, why do you ask these questions? And Dolores says, I was just wondering why they would go to all the trouble of making one out of metal. Saudi responds, they would contain more important information. There are some things that must be protected. He would not elaborate further. It seemed that if something were written on metal, it would be because it had special value. They were trying to use the most durable material to make sure it would survive. Thus, I cannot believe this copper scroll was a hoax. The archaeologists were just 2,000 years too late to uncover this fantastic treasure. Not convinced that that's the truth either. The archaeologists excavated the ruins of Qumran had made no mention of finding any housing area. They had come to the conclusion that the people lived in the caves around the community or perhaps in tents or huts. They found potteries, lamps, tent poles, and some of the same caves that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in, and thought this suggested that they lived there at one time. I could not understand why the Essenes would live in caves and tents when they were able to create this wonderful community with its marvelous water system. This did not make sense to me, and I decided to pursue it. You told me before that when you were a child you lived in houses that were away from the community outside the walls. Are there any caves in the vicinity of Qumran? Saudi responds, there are many caves. And Dolores, do your people ever live in the caves? Saudi responds, they said at one time they did, but there was not enough here now to have that as necessary. However, as children, we used to play in them. And Dolores says, you mean at one time there was more population, more people there? And during that time they lived in the caves? Saudi responds, yes, 'twas in the beginning. This was in the early times while the houses were being built. I thought that this would be the case. With such a wonderfully advanced community, it would not be necessary for the people to be reduced to living in caves and tents. During the excavations, they found many coins, even bags of them. This helped the scientists to date the ruins. The coins belong to the time periods from 136 BC to 37 BC, covering the period of the Jewish independence and extending to Herod the Great. Then there was a gap, only a few coins found that were issued between this period and 4 BC, the time of Herod Archelaus. There was a large number found dating after 4 BC to 68 AD when Qumran was destroyed. So Qumran was destroyed right in the time when Yeshua and all of the stuff about the New Testament was going on. It existed. On this evidence, the archaeologists have come to the conclusion that Qumran was abandoned for 30 years since they found only a few coins from that time period. But this was the time when Saudi was living there, and according to him, the Essenes never left. Even the scientists could not come up with a satisfactory reason why they would leave. They could see evidence that the community had experienced an earthquake, drawing on the community, and they assumed this might have damaged the community to such an extent that the people left for these 30 years. But this is only an assumption. Even the ancient writers, who were so thorough in their histories of the time, did not mention that the Essenes were ever absent from the area. This was only the archaeologists' theory based on what facts they were able to come up with during the excavation. I conclude that if the entire treasury of the Copper Scroll could completely disappear, why not bags of coins? The ruins were known to have been occupied and ransacked by the Romans during the invasion. There were also other people that lived there afterwards for a while before Qumran was abandoned entirely. I feel the archaeologists' findings do not contradict mine, but rather offer an alternative explanation. I wondered how to ask him about this without putting ideas into his head. It would have to be worded carefully. So Dolores says, can you tell me, Saudi, have the people lived there in the community all the time since it was built? Saudi responds, explain. Dolores says, have your people always lived there in the community continuously, or was there a time when your people left? And Saudi says, you speak of the time of the hiding. Yes, there was a time when they left for a period. Yes, it has been spoken about. But this occurred before his lifetime. During his time, there was never a time when the people abandoned the community. In the drawing, it can be noted that the earthquake damaged one end of the community and left a large crack, part of which ran through one of the baths. The archaeologists also found evidence that some of the damage was repaired, especially around the tower. And I wanted to ask about this, but I would not mention the word earthquake. And so Dolores says, do you know anything about the natural catastrophes that have occurred since you have lived there? Saudi paused as though thinking, you mean I remember when I was little, my mother said that there was the shaking of the cliffs. At one time, there was great fear for the whole place would fall into the sea. I was 2 or 3, maybe, I'm not sure, I have no memory of it. Did it do any damage to the community? Saudi, there is a handspan gap where that part of it slipped and fell. Apparently, he meant a crack. I asked where it was located, and she used hand gestures in his explanation. Let me think here. It is along the wall. The wall runs like this, and the cliff wall, and it is on that way, on the corner towards the bathhouse and the assembly hall in that area. It runs through in a diagonal. I think this last word is correct. It was hard to understand. Did the crack go through the bathhouse? Dolores asked. And Saudi responds, yes. The crack was not so that the water escaped. It was repaired, and the people of the community took it in their stride. They knew it was about to happen. Therefore, there was no loss of life. They had been told. And then in parentheses, she says, did he mean psychically? And of course, we know that Spirit is constantly still speaking to people. I think I'm going to stop right there for now. Been pretty heavy and intense. We'll pick up from there. Lots of information about thoughts and beliefs, friends. Part of why this is so relevant is because, as I think you probably noticed, that between the dialogue of Dolores and Saudi, there are lots of pieces that are coming out that very much should give you confidence. And I do think that we need to be careful. I think that we need to heed his wisdom. But at the same time, you have to be careful while you seek. And so being a person that is seeking truth, well, what is the truth? Is Christianity the truth? Is Gnosticism the truth? Is there somewhere in there between? I think those are the most honorable questions that we could ever ask ourselves. Unfortunately, not many people are asking those questions. And of course, that's always to the person who doesn't ask detriment. So it's very sad that we had to start at such a late stage in our life. Maybe for others they're in a much younger state. But it is quite amazing to me the amount of revelation that Source is capable of giving to an old dinosaur. And of course, I'm not talking about you. So I hope that you'll take these things, ponder them. Think about what is it? Think about what you are inside. If you haven't been, recommit to the affirmations that you are what truth says you are. You are what light says we are. And I believe if we'll continue on that path, the limits of him stopping are non-existent. I don't believe he will stop. The only time it will stop, and it doesn't really stop, it only stops because we leave these bodies behind. And so peace and shalom to each and every one of you. We'll put our hands together and come to Heart Center. And truly may the light in me be the light in you, and the light in you be the light in me. Namaste.